Hey there everybody, and welcome back to 12 Days of Amiga. Well, I've abandoned that name long ago, but this is a series where I have been ranking the Amiga models from worst to best. And we're down to the last two, and yeah, it's been an interesting journey. But without further ado, because I feel like I want to make the last few episodes of this series a little bit shorter, a little bit more snappy, not because of any real reason other than really there's not a huge amount to say, but you never know. So, what's in at number 2? Well, I've agonised over this one, and I believe I've made the right decision. I know some people are going to disagree with me, as I'm sure people have disagreed with me throughout this ranking, but I'm not going to waffle anymore. I'm just going to reveal what's in at number 2. It's the Amiga 500. I can hear the gnashing of teeth already.
Oof, that one landed with a bang, didn't you?
To be honest with you, I've gone backwards and forwards, should this be number 1 or not, and I've put it in at number 2, and I'll explain somewhat why in this video, but also I'll explain to some extent as well in the number 1 ranking, which for those of you who've been watching the series, you'll know what it is, but I'm not going to mention it directly right away. So, what is the Amiga 500? Well, I think most of us know what it is. It's this pretty fetching wedge style design, all in one, very much in the vein of what Commodore had the most success with as a company. These all-in-one computers like the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, and the Amiga 500 took up the C64's mantle as Commodore's flagship all-in-one sort of system. So first launched in March of 1987 in parts of Europe, I believe in Scandinavia, and throughout the rest of the world as the year proceeded. So yeah, it's a very fetching system, all-in-one design, has everything that the Amiga 1000 had, even down to the expansion connector, although it's the other way around, meaning that a lot of Amiga 1000 expansions aren't going to directly work with the system. But yeah, it's everything the Amiga 1000 was. I mean, you know, you couldn't really get much lower spec Amiga-wise than the 1000, so the only way was up, in a way, to coin a song lyric perhaps. But yeah, the main differences between this and the Amiga 1000 is that this contains 512 kilobytes of chip RAM by default, so it doesn't have like a 256k expansion like the Amiga 1000 had, and Kickstart is on ROM, so that when you switch on your Amiga you can boot into a game or the workbench disk or any other productivity application from the off. You don't need to load a Kickstart in via disk first of all. So yeah, hugely successful, by far and away the most popular Amiga model, mostly because it really fell into that sweet spot of being the upgrade path to people who had 8-bit microcomputers, for example, like the C64, the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, as well as other computers, maybe the BBC Micro or the Electron, to an extent in the UK, for example, and other systems that perhaps I've forgotten. Also, some people upgraded from other 16-bit systems like the Atari ST. So the Amiga 500 really fitted into the landscape of where computing in the home was, particularly in Europe, in the late 1980s into the early 1990s. And yeah, it really sold fantastically well. You know, it became the go-to system for games for a while, particularly in Europe, less so in the States, because obviously the PC just increased its dominance throughout the latter part of the 80s, and console gaming through the NES was wildly popular in the US, in a way that the Amiga just didn't quite catch on quite as well, or the Amiga 500 didn't catch on quite as well as it did in Europe, for example. You know, Europe never really went particularly mad for Nintendo until the Super Nintendo came along, and also the Mega Drive from Sega was probably, along with the Master System, the first real taste of console gaming for Europe. Well, obviously there were systems before that, but I'm talking of the Amiga 500 sort of era kind of thing. So, yeah. What else can I say about it? Extremely well designed system, considering it condensed down the Amiga 1000 technology. It's a big old beast these days. It's got quite a large desktop or desk footprint, But yeah, it's powerful. You know, it does everything you want out of an Amiga. You know, you've got various options for expansion. You know, you can plug in various accelerator cards directly into its 68,000 processor slot internally, which gives you the options of compact flash or SD card, mass storage for your WHD load. You can easily expand the memory through those kinds of expansions. You've got the side connector as well, which had various of the period expansions like hard disks, the A570 CD-ROM drive, which gives you CD-TV software compatibility, as well as being able to access Amiga software on CD. The trapdoor slot allows for an easy, simple 512 kilobyte RAM upgrade. Technically slow RAM, which is CPU only RAM that has to be accessed through Agnes, which gives its moniker slow RAM because it's kind of got a bit of a bottleneck there. But on some later Amiga models like the Rev 6 ones, you can do a few motherboard modifications, and with a 1 megabyte capable Agnes, that can actually become chip RAM, which is very useful for those of us doing music production using ProTrack on Optimed. Bigger sound samples, in Deluxe Paint you can create bigger animations and that kind of stuff. So all in all, just a really, really nice system. Yeah, so I think very highly of the Amiga 500. I think the thing that I like most about it, like the Amiga 600, is that this is still, as Amigas go, an affordable system. They have definitely got up in price massively in the last few years. I mean, even 4 or 5 years ago, you could pick up an Amiga 500, you know, just the main unit itself, maybe not the power supply and so forth, for about 30 to 50 pounds, really easily, good condition as well, fully working. But those days have gone. I think I'm seeing prices of around about 150 pounds or thereabouts upwards for a good complete system these days. But that's just the way that these things are going these days. You know, those of us who had these when we were younger, we're now grown up, we have disposable income, that drives up the price. That's just market economics. It's just the way it goes. But because it occupies a sweet point price-wise, like the Amiga 600, I feel that this is a very democratic Amiga. This is an Amiga for those of us who don't have huge amounts of disposable income, but can still enjoy the actual real hardware. So yeah, myself personally, I would choose an Amiga 600 over this, but taking into account what this machine was of the day means that this easily outpaces the Amiga 600 in that department. I would buy, personally, an Amiga 600 over one of these because you can easily take them to 2 megabytes of chip RAM. It's got the IDE interface built into the motherboard to be able to put your mass storage in there via compact flash or SD card for your WHD load. And that PCMCIA slot on the side allows for easy transfer of files to and from a PC or a Macintosh or Linux system, for example, which the Amiga 500 needs a little bit more extra accessories to do. I mean, you could buy an ACA 500 Plus card. Those can read compact flash cards in FAT32 format straight off the bat. Bit of an ugly expansion. I own one, but they're essentially a bare motherboard or daughter card or whatever that plugs into the side expansion slot. You know, they do look a bit ungainly, but you can buy aftermarket cases for them. I've got a nice little smoky black plastic one for my Amiga 500 back in the UK. But overall, I think that this is such an iconic machine, one which is still being, pushed in crazy ways. I mean, you know, like the stuff that the demo scene still does with the Amiga 500 just blows me away.
Oof, that one landed with a bang, didn't you?
And arguably, giving you an Amiga 500 with a 512k upgrade, a copy of Deluxe Paint 2 or 3, and I'll have a whale of a time with this machine. I just still think it's fantastic. Yeah, I would probably prefer to work on a machine with at least Kickstart 2 or Kickstart 3, just because I feel that Amiga OS 2 and 3 are just vastly superior to using 1.3. But if you've got the nostalgia for it, or if you just want a machine to run Pro Tracker or Deluxe Paint on, yeah, still works like a champ. Yeah, I think overall these are just wonderful systems. And of course, the trivia that everybody knows, the Amiga 500 was the system that took on the B-52's naming conventions. This was famously Rock Lobster on the motherboard. But of course, the thing with it is that Jeff Porter, who was overseeing the overall management of the Amiga 500 project, initially coined the B-52 term in terms of the B-52 American bomber aircraft, and that moniker for like this was going to be the thing that would put the Amiga into the lane that it should have been in terms of the marketplace, and lead to sort of it storming the computer market and so forth. I feel a little bit uncomfortable with that moniker being in Japan, but hey, it is what it is. And of course, the engineers either didn't see it that way or decided to have a bit of fun with it, and instead went with the American band, the B-52s, and famously gave the Amiga 500, as I say, the Rock Lobster moniker. The A590 hard disk was Party Mix, I believe. The Amiga 600 was Junebug, another B-52 song. The Amiga 1200 was Channel Z, which obviously another B-52 song. And the CD32 broke that tradition with going with Spellbound, which was Susie and the Banshees, British band. But anyway, so yeah, it's rather a cool machine. I still think these are great these days. And yeah, the only reason it's in here is because there is one Amiga that I've yet to talk about, that out Amiga 500, the Amiga 500. It was a machine that, rather by stealth, managed to slip through all the problems with Commodore engineering at the time, and basically got a last final hurrah for the Amiga. A bit more expensive these days to own the machine that's in at number 1, but I'm going to talk about it in its video. I'm really struggling to say any more about the Amiga 500. Yeah, it's going to run the vast majority of Amiga games that are out there. The fact that you do have the potential to take some of these machines quite easily to 1 megabyte or even 2 megabytes of chip RAM with a few modifications or the relevant upgrade means that these do make great WHD load machines. Obviously, you're not going to have the AGA compatibility, but if you get a Vampire for them, well then all things are on the cards, on the desk. What am I saying?
And this is the vehicle in which we'll be making the epic.
The Vampire makes all things possible with this machine. So yeah, a fabulous Amiga to own. I think, yeah, the big box Amigas are cool, but unless you're doing all the things that I've described in those videos, like video toasters, 16-bit sound cards, that kind of stuff, the Amiga 500 is going to be the Amiga that still, in 2023, is going to be the one to own. But there is one that's just slightly better than it, if you can stretch to afford one. So, there we go. What do you think? Should it be number 1? Should it be number 10? Let me know what you think about the Amiga 500 in the comments below. I'd love to read about your stories about when you got one, why you got one, why my ranking of the Amiga 500 is wrong, or why you agree with me. It'll be interesting to read all of those, and I look forward to, sort of talking with you all down there. But I guess it's a rather short episode, but I feel that this one speaks for itself in many ways. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I guess that all it remains for me to say is see you soon. Peace.
Oof, that one landed with a bang, didn't it?